Welcome back to Cross-Strait Chronicles. We turn complex cross-strait history into stories you can actually enjoy. Grab a seat, relax, and let's travel back in time, across the strait. Last time, we talked about the First Sino-Japanese War, how Qing China lost not just a war, but its confidence. Losing to Western powers was humiliating, but losing to Japan, a former student of China, that was devastating. The shock was so loud that finally everyone agreed on one thing: we cannot continue like this. And that realization sets the stage for today's story. Today's story is about one of the most dramatic almosts in modern Chinese history. A moment when everything could have changed, but didn't. This is the story of bold ideas, young reformers, terrified conservatives, and a ticking clock that no one could stop. Segment 1, A Court in Shock. By 1898, Beijing was in crisis mode. Officials weren't calmly debating policy, they were panicking. Memorials flooded the imperial court. We must reform education. We must reform the military. We must reform the economy. We must reform basically everything. This was no longer about pride. This was about survival. And at the center of this moment stood a young man who had never truly ruled before. Segment 2. The young emperor with big ideas meet the Guangxu emperor. He was in his 20s, idealistic, restless, and deeply aware that history was judging him. For most of his life, real power had belonged to his aunt, Empress Dowager Cixi. But now, after the disaster with Japan, even she stepped back just a little. Enough space for the emperor to act. Guangxu did something dangerous in Qing politics. He started listening to intellectuals. Segment 3. Enter Kang Yu and friends. If the 100 Days Reform had a face, it was Kang Yu, a scholar with big ideas and zero chill. Kang believed Confucianism supported reform. China could modernize without abandoning its soul. And time was running out. He and his allies proposed constitutional monarchy, modern schools, capitalist-style industries, a modern bureaucracy, an end to obsolete institutions. In short, let's rebuild the empire before it collapses. The emperor listened, and then he did something radical. Segment 4. Reform by imperial decree. Instead of slow negotiation, Guangxu chose speed. From June to September 1898, he issued decree after decree: education reform, military reform, economic reform, administrative reform. Historians would later count over 100 reform edicts. This became known as the 100 Days Reform. From the outside, it looked impressive. From the inside, it was chaos. Segment 5. Why speed became the enemy. Here's the problem. Reform is not just about ideas, it's about power. And every reform threatened someone's job, income, or influence. Officials asked, who's paying for this? Who's losing their position? Who approved this? Why weren't we consulted? The answer was often, because the emperor said so. That worked in theory. In reality, it created enemies everywhere. Segment 6. The Conservative Panic. For conservative officials, the reforms looked terrifying, not because they hated China, but because they feared chaos. To them, it felt like tradition was being tossed aside Institutions were being dismantled overnight, and young scholars were playing with fire. They whispered, "This isn't reform. This is suicide." And when conservatives panic in an imperial system, they look for one person. Segment 7. Cixi returns to the stage Empress Dowager. Cixi had been watching quietly. She wasn't against reform in principle. She had supported modernization before. But what she saw in 1898 alarmed her. Too fast, too centralized, too reckless. Most importantly, these reforms bypassed the political elite that kept the empire running. To Cixi, this wasn't reform. This was a coup, just with books instead of swords. Segment 8. The coup that ended it all. In September 1898, the clock ran out. Cixi acted. The emperor was placed under house arrest. Reformist leaders were arrested or executed. The reform decrees were canceled. The 100 Days reform ended almost as suddenly as it began. No long civil war, no dramatic battlefield, just silence. Segment 9. Why the reform failed. So why did it fail? Because it lacked political allies. It threatened too many interests. It relied on imperial authority without institutional support, and it moved faster than society could absorb. In short, reform tried to outrun reality. Segment 10. The tragic irony. Here's the irony. The reformers were right about almost everything. Education mattered, industry mattered, institutions mattered, time mattered. But they misunderstood one thing. You cannot modernize a system by ignoring how power works inside it. Segment 11. The aftermath. After 1898, China did reform, but now it was slower, more cautious and driven by fear, not hope, and something else changed. Young intellectuals stopped believing reform was enough. They began asking a darker question. If reform fails, does the system itself need to go? Segment Part 12. A door that never fully closed. The 100 Days reform failed, but it planted seeds, ideas about constitutionalism, nationalism, revolution. Those ideas would not disappear. They would come back, louder, angrier, and far more dangerous. The Sino-Japanese War of 1894 wasn't just a military defeat. It was the moment Qing China realized tradition alone could not save it. Partial reform was not enough, and the world would not wait. Japan didn't win because it was Japanese. It won because it rebuilt itself completely. China didn't lose because it was Chinese. It lost because it tried to change tools without changing power. So here's my question for you. Could the Qing dynasty have survived if the 100 Days reform had succeeded? Or was collapse already inevitable by 1898? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read what you think. If this video helped make Cross-Strait history a little less confusing, consider giving it a like and subscribing. History is complicated, but learning it doesn't have to be. Next time, we'll see what happens when reform fails and revolution steps in to take its place. I'll see you in the next episode.